Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, saving face. President Biden heads to Europe for the first foreign trip of his term, inside his mission to bolster relations with crucial allies, while here at home, bipartisan infrastructure talks collapse. Stop the spread. The CDC and the nation's top infectious disease doctor now sounding the alarm on an aggressive COVID variant that's engulfing the UK.
We cannot let that happen in the United States.
The so-called Delta variant is already starting to appear here in the States, the latest efforts to keep the mutation at bay. Score one for the good guys, an organized crime crackdown of global proportions, playing right into the hands of the FBI. How the Bureau busted hundreds of suspects using nothing more than a cell phone app. And oversharing, Amazon's controversial new feature that's supposed to strengthen your internet network by sharing your connection with your neighbors. But during a time of increased cyber attacks, is your privacy at risk? Joe, it's good to be back on set with you.
Welcome back from Boston.
Thank you. And, you know, it's really nice to be in a temperature-controlled setting, unlike yesterday where I was melting on live television.
No air conditioning there.
It was quite hot, but it was a good celebration to see.
Good.
Yeah, it's good to be back with you. But this morning, though, President Biden is heading on his first overseas trip to Europe.
Yeah, his 8-day visit will feature meetings with key allies at the G7 summit, followed by a highly anticipated summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. NBCNews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece joins us now. So, Shannon, President Biden is heading to the UK today for meetings with key allies. What is first on his agenda?
Well, first will be a meeting with the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who had a relatively close relationship with former President Trump, but is going to be really key to Biden's efforts to repair and rebuild alliances with some of these longtime European allies. After that meeting, he is going to sit down with the G7 leaders, this group of really kind of America's closest and oldest allies, and that's a group that saw a lot of tumultuous times over the past 4 years under the Trump administration. Typically, these international summits under then President Trump were full of drama and infighting. Trump really tore up a lot of diplomatic norms. So Biden's seeking to kind of repair relations with that group. Then he goes, meets with the NATO leaders, and then followed by that meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin that is expected to be quite contentious. A lot of difficult issues the two of them are expected to discuss.
So, Shannon, Putin aside, the rest might be allies, but the president still will be engaged in some tough negotiations on important issues. Give us a preview of what some of the biggest sticking points might be.
Well, of course, on the immediate forefront is the pandemic, which has really upended economies around the world, certainly not only the developed world, but in many of the developing countries. A big priority for the leaders is going to be trying to come up with some response to help out the rest of the world get access to vaccines. And the White House has indicated there could be some announcement coming from that. But more broadly, bigger picture, one of the biggest themes they're going to try and tackle is China, how to rein in increasing China aggression, how to address intellectual property violations, human rights violations by China, and then certainly this issue of Russia and the increasing number of cyber attacks coming out of Russia and Russian aggression towards its neighbors like Ukraine. So a lot of big issues to tackle, not only to mention, I should throw in there climate change as well. So all things that the president is hoping by sort of reaffirming America's place at the negotiating table, he can start building the framework to address those issues together along with these allies.
And Shannon, here in the States, the White House confirmed that President Biden has ended infrastructure talks with GOP negotiators, that group led by Senator Shelley Moore Capito. What did the White House say about the collapse of these talks and what happens next?
Well, an administration official said it really came down to the fact that President Biden wanted to see more new spending on infrastructure, whereas Republicans were focused on trying to use a lot of existing money out there, like COVID relief money, and sort of reshift that towards infrastructure projects. That Biden wanted a big new investment in infrastructure, and Republicans did not appear to be willing to want to put up a lot of new money. Of course, there was also disagreement over how to pay for this, with Republicans Republicans, really against any sort of tax increase. So now the White House says they are moving on. They're talking to a bipartisan group of senators. And of course, there's always the option they can do this alone with just Democratic support if, of course, they can keep all Democrats united in the Senate, which is a little bit of a question because you have a few moderate Democrats there who have indicated they might not be willing to vote for something unless it's bipartisan. But going a bit, I wouldn't say back to square one, but square two or three after weeks and hundreds of hours of conversations with this Republican group of senators.
Plenty to cover at home and abroad. Shannon, thank you so much.
Let's now bring in former U.S. Ambassador Chris Hill to unpack the high-stakes trip President Biden is set to take. He's an NBC News diplomacy contributor and the author of Outpost, A Diplomat at Work. Ambassador Hill, thank you so much for being with us. I think you're literally joining us from the airport before a flight, so thank you for making time for us. Now, we know our European allies were shaken by some of the policies of the last president, and frankly, just by his presence at some of these meetings. He would spar with them. He left one early to meet with North Korea's dictator. In addition to these negotiations and his own policies that President Biden will want to discuss, how much repairing does this president just have to do after President Trump?
Well, he's going to do some repairing by just showing up. I mean, this is going to be an enormous change. These previous meetings during the time of President Trump, I mean, no one knew how they were going to end, whether he was going to leave, whether he was going to bring up some new issue that he hadn't prepared anyone for. So I think President Biden, by just being kind of normal and listening a good percentage of the time, is going to do well. But I think he really has his work cut out for him. He needs to deal with some of the hardy perennials of NATO meetings, that is, getting our allies to do more. And he also has to do, very importantly, come up with some initiatives on this global pandemic, because as we see this whole thing waning in the U.S., it's really a huge problem in the global South. And I think the G7 in particular is pretty much tasked with the idea that it has to do more for the global South. So he's going to be busy. And of course, he's got the issue of dealing with President Putin in a relationship that has really been going very south in recent years.
Yeah, so let's talk about that meeting that will take place, that summit, after these G7 meetings. So, of course, Putin at one point was part of what was then the G8, and this meeting sort of looms over this first trip. So after seeing these allies, he's going to head to Geneva for that. What do you think the impact of that upcoming meeting with Putin is that's going to come just days after these meetings, and how should the White House navigate that impact with these G7 leaders?
Well, first of all, President Biden is going to improve the relationship with the G7. I mean, they're going to have problems. They're going to have issues about how to go forward, a pandemic, et cetera. But overall, you're going to get an impression of an alliance that's much stronger as a result of President Biden going there. So that's going to be a good story to go into the Putin meeting. I don't anticipate any kind of major developments in the Putin meeting, except I think Putin will understand that he's dealing with a formidable U.S. administration that I think is going to kind of lay out the agenda, and the agenda is going to be very tough, including these cyber attacks. So we're going to see, I think, an opportunity for the president to really show he's in charge. And he's been, this is not his first rodeo by any means. I think he's going to be able to manage this pretty well.
Yeah, certainly a president with quite a bit of foreign policy experience. But let's take out the White House spin. And you kind of just started to touch on this as far as what defines a true win from this trip, from these meetings. So first with the other G7 leaders, but also if we do look ahead to that Putin meeting, because as you just mentioned, there's a lot to cover here. Cyber attacks that are getting worse by the day, but we've already heard that we shouldn't expect any real deliverables to come out of it. So what is a win?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, Putin isn't going to admit to anything. He's going to be very cautious himself. But I think a win would be the president kind of laying out the agenda. I don't think we're going to have these weird one-on-one meetings where no one really knew what happened. I think it's going to be very well scripted. There'll be, briefings afterwards. It'll look very serious. And so I think the win will be for President Biden to come back to the States with a view in the States, because he's really got to play to his domestic audience of a president very much in charge. So I think he's going to look very good in all of this. The question is whether he can get an agenda that the Russians kind of agree to talk about, and whether he can work especially on this cyber stuff, because this is getting pretty serious.
Ambassador Hill, thank you for that one. Something to watch is for no weird one-on-one meetings. I like that.
That's
and
right.
If that's your gate behind you, your flight's boarding, so don't miss it on our account. Thanks for joining us.
Okay. All right.
Health officials are scrambling to get more Americans vaccinated in hopes of fending off a highly contagious variant. They want to make sure the Delta variant, which was first discovered in India, does not become a dominant strain in the U.S. It has already become the dominant variant in the U.K., making up about 60% of new cases there, especially among young people between the ages of 12 and 20. Dr. Anthony Fauci says the vaccine is our best weapon against this strain.
In the UK, the Delta variant is the rapidly emerging as the dominant variant. We cannot let that happen in the United States.
NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez is following the latest on the pandemic this morning. So, Isa, we know it's bad in the UK, but what's happening in the U.S. with this Delta variant right now?
Good morning, Joe. That's right. The Delta variant here in the U.S. accounts for over 6% of cases that have been sequenced by scientists here, but the number is actually likely higher than that. Dr. Fauci has said that the Delta strain is more contagious than the original COVID-19 strain, and that it's likely associated with higher hospitalization rates. Now, when it comes to vaccine effectiveness against this variant, he also said that the Pfizer vaccine and the AstraZeneca vaccine after 2 doses are effective against the Delta strain. He did not mention the Moderna vaccine or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but again, we do know that that Pfizer vaccine after 2 doses is 88% effective at protecting against symptomatic COVID-19 cases of this Delta variant. He also emphasized the importance of getting 2 doses of the vaccine if you are getting a 2-dose vaccine, because studies showed that the Pfizer vaccine and the AstraZeneca vaccine were only 33% effective at protecting against this particular variant if only 1 dose was taken. Joe?
Isa, let's talk about the return of the cruise line industry. Norwegian now says it plans to set sail from 2 Florida ports in August and will require passengers to be vaccinated fully. That's despite a state ban on vaccine passports. So how will this voyage work? And what are their officials there saying about this?
Yeah, Joe. So this cruise line is not the first to do this. Carnival Cruise Line Celebrity are also requiring vaccine passports, proof of vaccination for their guests to board. Now, Norwegian specifically has not said how they plan to deal with Florida's bans, but the company's CEO did say, quote, "We're currently in communication with his staff and legal counsel." He's referring there to Governor DeSantis and his team to ensure that we can offer the safest cruise experience for our passengers departing from the cruise capital of the world. Now, originally, the company's CEO has said that he would be avoiding Florida altogether for their cruise departures because of the state's stance there. Of course, DeSantis has a current executive order ban there on vaccine passports, and they have a law that he signed going into effect July 1st that requires companies that are asking for vaccine proof to pay a $5,000 fine. Joe?
And Isa, we can now add marijuana to the list of incentives offered to people who get the COVID vaccine. Washington State is now allowing this. I've lived there, so I'm surprised it took this long. How will this incentive work?
Yeah, Joe, excited to see some news from our old state where we both lived and worked. This incentive program is called Joints for Jabs, and how it works is the state is authorizing state licensed cannabis retailers to give 1 marijuana joint to someone who can prove that they have either gotten their first or their second COVID vaccine dose at an active vaccination clinic. Now, this is only for Washingtonians who are 21 and older. It only applies to pre-rolled joints that have been pre-rolled in store and can't be substituted for other marijuana treats like edibles. This comes at a key time for Washington as they get closer and closer to their goal of vaccinating 70% of their 16 and older population. Governor Jay Inslee has said that once they meet that goal, they'll be lifting the majority of the remaining COVID-19 restrictions in the state. Joe?
Whatever it takes. All right, Isa, thank you so much.
Vaccination rates are slowing across the country, and that means the U.S. probably won't meet the president's goal of getting at least one shot to 70% of Americans by July 4th. Right now, more than 61% of eligible Americans have received at least one dose. To meet the president's target, though, more than 15 million unvaccinated adults would need to get at least one shot in the next 4 weeks. But the pace of vaccinations has dropped significantly, especially in the South and Midwest, where rates are already low. For more on that, I want to bring in NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber. She joins us now from Phoenix City, Alabama, a state that ranks second to last nationwide in its COVID-19 vaccination rate. Ellison, good morning. Good to see you. So looking at the overall state numbers here, it's just 36% of people that have had that one dose. But that percentage is even lower. Actually, it's a lot lower where you are in Russell County. So what factors are at play here? And what are people there telling you about why they're not getting the shot?
3% of the population here are fully vaccinated. This county where we are, Russell County, it is the least vaccinated county in the entire state. Only about 14% of people who live here have been vaccinated. As we were out speaking with people, the reasons we heard for why people have chosen not to get vaccinated varied from logical concerns, logical questions, to outright conspiracy theories. Listen here.
Well, I haven't taken the vaccine, and the reason is I don't trust it. I'm sorry, but I just don't.
I made it this far without getting COVID, and I don't need to get vaccinated. I'm kind of like a conspiracy theorist, so, I be thinking about stuff like that. But
Why did you want to get the vaccine?
Well, I didn't want to get COVID. Mainly, that was my main reason. Yeah, I've been vaccinated ever since I was born, so I didn't have any problem with it.
We've lost a lot of lives. So I don't think it's worth losing a family member or your own life over taking a risk of getting a vaccination,
When we asked the people who had been vaccinated if they were surprised by the low rate of vaccination in this area, they told us consistently they were not. The last woman you heard from there, she told us she thinks politics are somewhat at play. Savannah?
Ellison, I know we've talked a lot about vaccine hesitancy, and you're hearing the reasons for it there from folks, but the discussion often doesn't have much of a personal face on it, how vaccine hesitancy is going to affect somebody else or what they're going to feel about it based on their own experiences. I know, though, that you spoke with a man in this county that you're in with such a low vaccination rate who had a very personal reason for wanting to get the shot. Tell us about what's happened to his family and what his message is to people who still aren't sure.
Yeah, his name is Antonio. He was someone who said, by his own description, he was sort of on the fence about getting the COVID-19 vaccine or one of the COVID-19 vaccines. But then his mother, Catherine Ann Brundage, who owns a local restaurant here called Lily B. Rose, she started it about 10 years ago. She got sick with COVID-19 in April, and because of it, she later died. He said within a day of losing his mother, he got online, he signed up for a vaccine appointment, and he got his first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine within 2 days of losing his mother. I want you to just listen to some of what he heard about his story, his family's story, and why he made this decision.
Would you have gotten vaccinated if?
I don't know. I was in the air about it. I don't know. But I know that definitely pushed me towards getting the vaccination. COVID is real. Like I said, you don't know it till it's on your street. Like when I had to deal with it, I didn't get real sick. I was sick maybe 2 days, little light symptoms. But, so like I say, an elderly person that got pre-existing illnesses, it can be fatal. And in our case, it was fatal.
His mom, Catherine, she actually had a vaccine appointment when she died. She got sick towards the end of April. Her family says she passed away on a Thursday. She had a vaccine appointment scheduled for the following Tuesday. She never made it there. She was a mom to 4, grandmother to 6, a superb chef, and beloved in this area. Again, her family says they understand this is a personal choice, but given what they went through, they think it is something that's worth considering. Savannah?
Absolutely. You hear him say you don't know it till it's on your street, but the point of the shot is that it doesn't have to come to your street. Ellison, thank you so much.
More hot and steamy weather is expected today, but a cooling off period for millions could finally be on the horizon. With that, let's get a check on your morning news now weather.
From Bill Cairns, of course. Hi, Bill.
Hey, good morning, guys. Yeah, shocking news. I'm going to talk about flash flooding and this heat wave. It's been day after day for like the last 10 days. And for the people in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, this really needs to stop. We've had a particularly dangerous situation overnight with a lot of heavy rain in areas that have already picked up a foot in the last 36 hours. I mean, that's just a ton of rain. And now a lot of this heavy rain is shifting into areas of northern Mississippi. Once again, the counties that are colored in the maroon, those are under flash flood warning. So that does include Tupelo, Oxford, Clarksdale, and a little spot there just to the southeast of Little Rock. And the flash flood watch continues for today. Here's what our computers are saying as far as additional rainfall is going to go. Notice that line right where the heavy stuff is, that 2 to 3 inches additional rain in the areas that already are seeing flash flooding. So really big concerns for the small streams and rivers in areas in northern Mississippi during the day today. And then eventually, because it's summer and it's so humid, we're going to spark those thunderstorms. Everywhere you see the yellow and the reds is where thunderstorms are possible. Eastern North Carolina, numerous storms today from D.C., Delaware, Maryland, up in the areas of New Jersey, also through Ohio. And our friends around Oklahoma City and Dallas could see some scattered storms late tonight also. So for today's forecast, today's the last really hot and humid day in the northeast. The heat is not going anywhere anytime soon in the Central Plains. And let's take a sneak peek at the weekend. Why not? Heavy rain likely on Friday in areas of Virginia and North Carolina. Much cooler conditions in areas of the Northeast. A little bit of wet weather, too, in areas of the Pacific Northwest. Then on Saturday, we finally dry things out. Mississippi through Arkansas. The Northeast looks beautiful. No problems there. Much of the country is good, but still hot in the middle. And just a few storms in the areas of Florida and Georgia on Sunday. The Northwest is probably the one area of the country that can complain a little bit. This weekend does look kind of cool, cloudy with some showers. But about 85 to 90% of the nation is looking at a pretty nice weekend coming up. And I was just looking at the calendar, guys. The Sunday after this is Father's Day already.
I know. Wow.
Year's flying by.
Yeah, it really is. Also, Bill, I just love when you give us a weekend forecast on a Wednesday.
Yeah, don't tempt me. I'll go to Tuesday if I have to.
Ooh, all right. Maybe next week for Father's Day.
See you next hour, Bill.
Sticking with our climate coverage, California is in the middle of one of its driest years ever. In fact, the entire state is in a drought. Thousands of acres of farmland and crops are drying up, forcing farmers to make some tough decisions. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson shows us what's going on in Lake Orville, California.
The West is in crisis. More than 50% of the region is now under what's classified as exceptional drought, the highest emergency tier possible. In California, it's even more dire. Nearly the entire state is experiencing some form of drought. Last month, the governor placed 41 of the state's 58 counties in a drought emergency. Now, water is already scarce.
It's very heartbreaking. We prepared the ground for planting. We put fertilizer in. We put a lot of money into this already, except once you don't have water, you stop right there.
Perhaps nowhere is the pain currently more poignant than on the farm.
California has been going through droughts now for a number of years, and they're not going to go away. They're going to come back. And we hope to God it doesn't continue next year, because then we may go out of business. I'm pretty scared this year, actually, because we've never been in this kind of uncertainty before.
Joe Del Bosque is doing what so many farmers are forced to right now, brace himself. Of the 2,000 acres he usually fills with workers, eager to yield almonds, melons, corn, and other crops, he's had to leave more than 600 acres unseeded.
So where are we standing right now? What is this?
This is a fallow field. This is a field that we would have planted melons if we had water. We don't have any water, so we don't plant.
The agriculture industry, based in California's Central Valley, grows more than a third of the vegetables and 2/3 of the total fruits and nuts across the country.
I estimate we're going to lose probably 30% of our income.
30% of your income?
Yeah.
Bar none.
Yes.
How much money?
Because we're losing 30% of the acreage.
What's that translate into dollars?
It's in 7 figures.
Wow.
Because of the dip in production, Joe has already laid off about 70 workers. He says it's his biggest fear, and it could get far worse.
Is there anything you can do to get more water at this point?
We have gone into partnerships with other farmers that have water to buy their water. It's expensive, but they're willing to sell it to us at a price, and we're happy to take it because it keeps us alive.
This is what much of California looks like right now. These bone-dry, barren fields. Farmers are worried they may not see a drop of rain until December, and they're even more concerned that this drought may go on for years. As we speak, the state's reservoirs that supply fresh water to millions are filled to less than half their average capacity. If levels drop any lower, and they're expected to as the summer months heat up, ecological and economic conditions will only get worse.
This is the third driest year in more than 100 years of precipitation records. And because the climate is warmer than it has been for most of history, I suspect the stream flows will be a little bit drier than we would normally expect, even from the third driest year on record.
Scientists say that most of the major city centers in California are prepared for a serious drought and have enough water to avoid much of the pain. At most, residents will be asked to conserve about 20% of their usage. But until more water storage is created for the rest of the state, its economy and people will suffer.
Today, we don't know what we have and when we'll have it. And that's scary for us because we don't want to lose our crops.
Coming up, the CEO of Colonial Pipeline facing Congress after hackers caused a gas shortage last month.
Why he says he would still pay the ransom if he could go back in time next. Colonial Pipeline CEO Joseph Blount outlined how Russian hackers were able to attack the company's IT network during a Senate hearing yesterday. NBC News correspondent Pete Williams has the latest.
In his first public comment about the attack, Colonial CEO says the company learned it was hit just before 5 a.m. May 7th and shut down the pipeline within 15 minutes. The next day, he decided to pay the hackers in Russia the $4.4 million they demanded.
It was the hardest decision I've made in my 39 years in the energy industry, and I know how critical our pipeline is to the country, and I put the interests of the country first.
The hackers got in through a simple password sign-in program that allowed employees to work remotely, one that did not require two-factor authentication.
This brings a whole new meaning to the phrase, you're only as strong as your weakest link.
But the CEO says paying the ransom was the best way to get the pipeline flowing.
It's the absolute right decision to make, and I'd do it again under the same circumstances.
It took 5 days to get the pipeline going, but the run on gas stations lasted even longer. Pete Williams, NBC News, Washington.
Let's take a look at what's making news around the world this morning.
Today we have Janice Mackey-Freyer with us. Good morning, Janice.
Hey, good morning, guys. We're going to begin in Afghanistan, where at least 10 mine clearing workers with the charity Halo Trust were shot and killed today. Afghan officials have blamed the Taliban. The Taliban has denied it. And the charity has said that the local Taliban had actually come to their aid. This all happened in Baghlan province. There has been a surge in violence in Afghanistan as U.S. and international troops have been withdrawing, and peace talks are going nowhere. In Israel, there is going to be a big weekend for politics. On Sunday, there will be a vote of confidence in an opposition-led government that could unseat Benjamin Netanyahu after 12 consecutive years in power. The opposition leader has pulled together 8 parties from all parts of the political spectrum into what he calls a government of change. Netanyahu is fighting it. He's hoping for defectors. Meanwhile, Israeli officials have given the go-ahead to a contentious march by far-right nationalists and settlers through Jerusalem's Old City. That's going to happen early next week after police had scrapped the event because of security concerns. And where do you think is the most livable city in the world? Well, the annual index by the Economist Intelligence Unit has chosen Auckland, New Zealand as the top spot, pushing out Vienna, which had been number 1 for a few years. The least livable city is Damascus because of the ongoing civil war. There were a lot of changes in this year's rankings because of the pandemic, obviously, and the strength of healthcare systems in different places. Osaka, Japan rated high along with 4 Australian cities. The top U.S. honors went to Honolulu and to Houston, which actually jumped 25 spots in this year's list. Guys?
That's a big one. Somewhere new to visit. New Zealand. It'll be a long flight, but
yes.
Thanks, Janice. Coming up, hundreds of organized crime suspects brought down by a cell phone app.
We'll tell you how the FBI and Australian law enforcement were able to make it happen. Chris Harrison is leaving ABC's The Bachelor franchise for good. Harrison, who hosted the dating reality series for nearly 20 years, stepped aside from his role in February. He had defended a former contestant who was shown in past photos attending an antebellum plantation-themed party. He later admitted he made a mistake. In a statement on his Instagram, Harrison said he was excited to start a new chapter. Former Bachelorettes Tayshia Adams and Caitlin Bristow are currently hosting the show's latest season. I am not an expert on The Bachelor. You are, but there's probably like a rose metaphor we should be saying in here or something, right?
I don't know that I'm qualified to be an expert, and I haven't watched all that recently, but I mean, this was a big deal. He'd obviously hosted for a very long time. But yeah, you're the pun guy, not me. So you know about the roses.
I got nothing.
Thanks, Joe. Yep. A rare coordinated effort between 16 countries led to a massive takedown of organized crime leaders. Experts say global implications of the operation are staggering. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin explains how law enforcement agents were able to use an encrypted device company to access messages from the criminal networks.
Good morning, Savannah and Joe. The FBI calls it Operation Trojan Shield, and it essentially takes what has been a problem for law enforcement for some time, criminals' ability to use encrypted devices to communicate with each other, and uses it to their advantage.
A global crackdown on organized crime. 800 criminals across 16 countries under arrest. More than 30 tons of drugs and nearly $50 million worth of currency seized. The operation made possible thanks to encrypted devices the criminals thought they could trust, but had actually been developed and were being controlled by the FBI with the help of the Australian Federal Police.
In reality, the criminals were not underneath the radar. They were on it.
The system is called Anam. The FBI made 12,000 available on the black market, advertising them as secure encrypted devices. Criminals use the devices to message each other, all the while unknowingly sending carbon copies of their messages to law enforcement. Authorities say criminals use the platform to communicate about everything from trafficking drugs and weapons, even contract killings.
We were able to actually see photographs of hundreds of tons of cocaine that were concealed in shipments of fruit.
Law enforcement's message to criminals around the world: be warned, you could fall into the next trap.
Law enforcement officials say this is far from over. They expect to launch countless spin-off operations as a result of the sheer volume of evidence and information they've collected so far. Savannah and Joe.
Aaron McLaughlin, thank you so much.
Black home appraisers are speaking out, criticizing the industry for racial bias. A study in the Social Problems Journal says the long-standing issue is contributing to the widening wealth gap for black families. NBCNews.com contributor Safiya Sami Ali has the story.
A study from the Journal of Social Problems found that from 1980 to 2015, homes in white neighborhoods appreciated almost $200,000 more than comparable homes in communities of color. The Brookings Institution found that in the average U.S. metropolitan area, homes in neighborhoods where the share of the population is 50% black are valued at roughly half the price as homes in neighborhoods with no black residents. The undervaluing of real estate across racial lines has contributed to a growing wealth gap between black and white families. According to the Federal Reserve, the typical white family has 8 times the wealth of the typical black family. The appraisal industry continues to be criticized for race-based bias against black homeowners, but black appraisers themselves are raising the alarms from inside the industry. I spoke with Jillian White, a black appraiser based in New York City, who says lack of mentorship in the industry has perpetuated a lack of diversity within appraisers.
In order to become a real estate appraiser, you have to do 2 things. Number 1, you have to complete your qualifying education, and then you need to pair up with a supervisor appraiser to mentor you and sign off on your report. If this is a career that's often passed down through family and friends, people of color are at a huge disadvantage when trying to find somebody to act as their supervisory appraiser. So when I first became an appraiser and it came time for me to look for a supervisor, I was sending out resume after resume, getting absolutely no response. Then I remembered that real estate appraising is a very male-dominated field. So on my resume, I changed my name from Jillian to Jay White, and Jay White got 5 times the number of responses as Jillian. And I remember there was one appraiser in particular who was really excited about my resume. He sent me an email immediately and asked if I could come into his office to interview that day. I said, absolutely. I dropped everything. About 30 minutes later, I was standing on his threshold. But when he saw that I was Jay White, all of the enthusiasm that he had for meeting me kind of dissipated. And we conducted the entire interview with me standing in the threshold and him just saying, like, actually, I don't know why you want to be an appraiser. You're overqualified. So 10 minutes later, I was back in my car, headed home.
It wasn't until 70 years ago that the appraisal industry was even open to Black Americans, so it's hard to say what impact diversity will have. However, research on diversity in other institutions does say that it could help alleviate some of the racial bias in home appraisals.
The people who are going into neighborhoods and attaching opinions of value oftentimes are not representative of the communities that are being served. And an appraisal, by definition, is an opinion. So when you have a group that is exceptionally homogenous, whatever biases of those group might be present, unconscious or otherwise, that is going to show itself. And I think that's what we're seeing now. On top of that, there is the systemic bias, which is inherent in how Black neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color in general have had property values associated with them.
Despite years of stagnation, there has been some movement on the issue. Last week, the Biden administration unveiled new steps to narrow the racial wealth gap. This includes addressing racial bias in home appraisals. The increased scrutiny has also caught attention from the nation's largest professional association of real estate appraisers. In a statement to NBC News, the Appraisal Institute said, quote, "When we see even one story of a consumer who feels they were treated differently because of their race, it's very concerning because that goes against everything we stand for." They also added that over the last 2 years, the Appraisal Institute has been amplifying and accelerating internal initiatives and partnerships to bring about positive change, including improving diversity within the profession. Only time will tell whether or not these initiatives will make a dent in race-based appraisal bias, but the appraisers I talked to said it's a promising start.
Construction work is taking place at the border wall, but it's not what you might expect. The Army Corps of Engineers is racing to repair levees that were breached to build the wall. And it's a race against time with fears that hurricane season could devastate the area. NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns got exclusive access to the work site. She joins us now from Mission, Texas. So Dasha, will these repairs get done before the first storm hits?
Hey, Joe, good morning. Yeah, this is an area that's extremely prone to hurricanes and to flooding. And so the levee system was critical for this community. But the short answer to your question is the Army Corps of Engineers says they are now in good shape to make sure that this region is protected should a hurricane come. We don't know when that first storm will hit, but they say they'll be ready when it does. And that's in large part because of the hustle of the crews here. You can see it's very early in Texas this morning, but they're already getting started. They'll be working 12, 14-hour days, 6 days a week to really make sure that this gets done and it gets done properly. This site already looks very different than when I was here just yesterday morning. And let me show you a little bit of what we're looking at here. I'll take you this way. So this area used to be a levee. It was a tall earthen mound that was protecting this area, but that was cut out. This is an area which had one of the largest gaps in the region, 1,700-foot gap. They have 600 feet left to fill. So this is where they'll be laying a concrete foundation today. And later in the day, I'll bring you over here. Part of this might start looking a little bit more like what you see here, which is the concrete, which is sort of the heart of the levee system. This is really that protective barrier. And then by the end of the month, I'm told that this will be a levee, which was once going to be a border wall. I want you to hear from General Christopher Beck from the Army Corps of Engineers. Take a listen to what he told me.
Was there some urgency for you guys to make sure you got a lot of this work done in time for hurricane season? Because we're in the thick of it now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the purpose of the levee is obviously to remediate or mitigate against flood threat. And the more complete the levee system is, the more repaired those excavations are, the better flood protection it provides against a threat to the people and infrastructure behind the levee. So we certainly had a sense of urgency.
Joe, the community was incredibly concerned. Now they are relieved. They're watching this work get done. They're hopeful that they will have protection as we're now in hurricane season. Joe?
Yeah, you mentioned the community was concerned. How are local officials reacting to all this?
Well, look, the border wall was a hallmark of the Trump administration. As soon as Joe Biden, though, signed that executive order to stop construction literally stopped. It ground to a screeching halt, and these gaps were left here, and the community was left wondering what is going to happen here. And I talked to the county judge, Judge Richard Cortez, who really led the charge in raising the red flag and saying, hey, we really got to do something about this. He told me that he was a little bit disappointed with the lack of urgency from the administration. It took a little while for them to make sure that this was taken care of. And this is really sort of the visual representation of the whiplash between these two very different administrations, Joe. Literally a race to fill the gap between the Trump administration and the Biden administration that are approaching the border, immigration, the wall, all very differently, Joe.
All right, Dasha Burns reporting from Texas. Dasha, thank you so much. Coming up, a new feature on Amazon Echo and Ring devices could be sharing your internet connection with your neighbors.
Yeah, we'll show you how to opt out up next. If you use an Amazon device like the Echo or a Ring camera, you may be sharing your internet with your neighbors. NBC News investigative and consumer correspondent Vicki Nguyen tells us about a new feature that's raising eyebrows.
Today, millions of Amazon devices now have Sidewalk, a feature that extends internet access between neighbors with Echo speakers, Ring security cameras, and Tile devices.
How does Sidewalk work?
Sidewalk allows your devices to connect to either your Wi-Fi network or your neighbor's Wi-Fi network to improve the quality of smart home devices all throughout the neighborhood.
The more people, the stronger the network, which allows smart devices to reach more places and things that didn't connect before.
The more connected we are, the more potential for vulnerabilities to be exploited by bad actors.
In a statement, Amazon said Sidewalk is a secure, shared network designed with multiple layers of privacy and security, and customers can disable the settings at any time.
If you have an Echo speaker and you want to turn off the Sidewalk feature, it takes a few steps. First, open your Amazon Alexa app, tap on More, go to Settings, then Account Settings, Amazon Sidewalk, scroll down and tap here until it says disabled.
For the Ring camera, open your Ring app, go to the Control Center, Amazon Sidewalk, disable, and confirm. Steps you can take if you're not ready to go down this sidewalk.
It's time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
CNBC's Kate Rooney joins us today. Hey there, Kate.
Hey, good morning, guys. Chipotle recently raised menu prices by roughly 4% to help cover the cost of wage increases. Executives at the burrito chain believe other restaurants will also feel that pinch of inflation. Chipotle's CFO says the industry is going to have to do something similar or lose out in the staffing game. He says the price increases were worth it to help boost wages, and Chipotle is getting more applicants as a result. Another retailer is also feeling the impact of inflation. Sherwin-Williams says business is great. That's thanks to continued strong demand for paints and other products. But rising costs for raw materials will force it to hike prices by 7% in August. Sherwin-Williams has benefited from a boom in home improvement projects during the pandemic. And El Salvador is now the first company to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. That's after lawmakers approved the president's proposal to embrace that cryptocurrency. He has touted the use of Bitcoin for its potential to help El Salvadorians living abroad send money back home. And while Bitcoin will become legal tender in 90 days, the U.S. dollar will still be the country's primary currency. El Salvador's economy relies heavily on money sent back from workers abroad. Guys, back to you.
All right. Kate, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate.
Verndale Smith was a pillar in the Chicago dance community and provided a safe space for children. But 2 weeks ago, he was shot and killed near his dance studio.
Now there is a search for justice and a mission to keep his dream alive. NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt has that story.
Joe in Savannah, this is a story about the search for justice for a man who inspired so many young people and the fight to keep his dream alive. For the kids at Ultimate Threat Dance Studio, music keeps them going, even in the face of tragedy. Last month, Ultimate Threat's founder, Verndale Smith, was fatally shot just blocks from the studio he started over a decade ago to keep kids off the street and away from guns, leaving his family and community grieving, but with new purpose.
I realized that he was a father figure to a lot of people that were in the studio. He was a mentor. I feel like it's my duty to continue his legacy by keeping the studio open.
Hundreds of miles away, his cousin felt that same duty.
I literally woke up that morning and I was like, we've got to save the studio. I will stop everything and let's do this.
With thousands of dollars to raise, the students are doing what Verndale taught them, taking their dancing to the streets.
He still wants us to succeed, still succeed with his legacy, keep everything going. We have to keep everything strong. We have to stay strong. We know that he's, watching us from the outside, we still feel his spirit here.
His spirit guiding them forward, one move at a time. Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.